Hey everyone, welcome back, or welcome if you're new to the channel. My past few projects have actually been quite pacifist, considering I'm more of a creator than a destroyer. We have the WhatsApp project, which still needs to be finished, we have the sheep sorter, and then we have the anvil cannon. But I definitely can still get behind creating to destroy, i.e. building something big to destroy something big. So today we're going to be talking about heavy ordnance. Okay. Let's set the scene. You live over here on top of this very neat treehouse, and your friend lives all the way over here inside of this cave, buried under about 17 meters of rock. And you want to send him a message. Very simple, very concise. My English teacher would be proud. Now, how do we do it? Well, the answer that I came up with was this mobile bunker buster design that I can drive to any location and then launch at my own command. But wait, how did we get here? And I'm talking, how did we get from this kind of stupid idea to designing this entire machine from the ground up and prototyping it, testing it, and finalizing the design? Okay. So obviously the idea was very clear. I wanted to make a machine that drills into the ground and then explodes, because I hadn't seen anybody ever do that before, and I thought it was a pretty cool idea. But we've got a lot to cover here, so let's just start with where I started from, which is the actual missile. It's broken into many parts, but here we have the engine, we have the TNT pushers, we have the actual TNT, the drilling charge, and this tiny little redstone block we call the ignition switch. Okay, let's start from the bottom. How do we actually get all this TNT into the ground? The way we do it is we dig a preliminary hole using this thing I call the drilling charge dispenser. And what it does is it just empties a large amount of TNT minecarts into one spot in the floor, which digs a small hole for the rest of the missile to enter through. It does this pretty simply by using this miniature piston setup, and whenever this moves downward one block, it pushes this piston to the left here, and this one to the left as well. And the purpose of this piston is to shovel away all the glass that we use to push the TNT minecart so it doesn't get in the way. And this other piston actually pushes the TNT minecart out, causing it to explode at the bottom. And once we run through all 11 minecarts, we get a pretty deep hole, allowing us to actually get the entire bunker buster into the ground, like this undetonated one here. This design wasn't always so compact. We actually started with much more efficient setups, like this one with only a TNT minecart every other block, and we even started with only 3 minecarts, but we eventually got to 6, and now we're at 11, allowing for some pretty deep holes. Okay, so next on the list we've got the actual load of TNT and the ignition switch. The entire load of TNT is moved down by this array of 5 pistons, all pushing about 12 blocks of TNT as well as some other components, and the ignition switch is just this redstone block here. And the way it works is that every time the machine moves downwards one block, both this TNT and the redstone block next to it move down at the same time, causing no ignition. But the moment that this chunk of machinery gets caught on something, probably the bottom of the hole, this piston can't push, and thus this can't push. And the moment there's an obstruction right here, the next time we push it, the redstone block goes forward, but the TNT doesn't, and it lines up, causing the predicted explosion. So, a side note about the ignition switch on this machine is you may have noticed it's at the top here, instead of at the bottom where the actual thing contacts the ground, as well as where it was in a lot of the previous prototypes. And this is actually a very deliberate decision I made, because I thought that an explosion top down would cause more destruction in the ground, as opposed to an explosion from bottom to top, launching the TNT out the top. And this is a good example of why it's actually important to test these theories, because when I did, after designing the machine, I realized there was no difference and I was actually just totally delusional. But in the end, it actually ended up being a fine design change, because it means I didn't need to extend a dongle at the bottom here that would touch the ground before this part of the machine was, because in order to cause an ignition, because I could just use this as the dongle, which would just propagate upwards, making for a very convenient ignition switch. Lastly, for the missile, let's cover the engine. It's this entire top section here. In reality, engines are very simple. You just have one piston push, then one piston pull, and that's basically what this is. This piston pulls this, which pulls this, which pulls this, which pulls this, and then this pushes down twice, and then it pushes it down one step. But the reason why this has to be extra convoluted is speed. Normal engines are way, way too fast. And even though this entire missile can take that speed, it's specifically this section. Because if we eject drilling charges too quickly, not only do they not explode properly, but they can lead to them getting launched upwards into the missile in a compounding chain reaction, which causes early detonation, which we don't want. So here we're just introducing a lot of midway steps in the engine for every time it moves a block, increasing the amount of time it takes for it to complete a cycle. Unfortunately, this results in the engine being very, very, very slow, but that's a sacrifice we have to make in order for it to drill these deep holes that we described earlier. Okay, so we've covered the entire missile from bottom to top, but we still have to get the missile to the location we actually want to do the drilling and the exploding. So, let's talk about it. This entire green structure, or mostly green structure, there's some honey up there, basically moves the entire machine. And it looks complicated, but it's really just an interconnected network of these pistons that push up these pistons, that push other pistons, that push parts of the machine. But there's a couple details that I really want to cover, like the stopping switch, the ignition switch, this little dongle right here, as well as all the precautions we take to make sure the engine doesn't start firing before we're ready to let it fire. As we displayed earlier, every time we move a slime block contraption with observers on it, these observers want to fire. And the reason this happens is because the observer is being moved, and it causes every single piston in the contraption to fire. And this might seem like a bad thing initially, but it's actually not a huge deal because most of every single piston right here is just an open-faced piston, meaning if I actually were to go ahead and trigger it, nothing happens. But there's a minor difficulty when it comes to the engine, because it has sticky pistons, which even if they're open-faced, they can start pulling things, and things can start going haywire very quickly. So how do we stop these pistons from pulling and pushing the engine apart while we're moving the engine around? So, let's start with the two categories of pistons we need to stop. This one, which pulls, and all of these, which push. Let's start with the pull here. This one actually doesn't even have an observer tied to it, so it never actually fires. And the reason is because this piston only pushes this observer right next to this piston when this detector rail is active, meaning we're ready to engage the missile. So it physically cannot mess things up until we're ready to let it go. As for these pistons, sure, they're powered by observers constantly, but the way we nullify their action is by keeping this giant load of glazed terracotta that's pushed forward along with the rest of the machine that just totally overloads every single one of these pistons, meaning none of them ever have the chance to have as little blocks as they need to fire, meaning none of these problematic pistons fire when we're moving the entire contraption. Okay, onto this weird little dongle here. This is actually tied to the ignition switch, so when this pushes, this redstone block goes forward. And the reason why this is so weird is because number one, the redstone block is all the way at the front here, making it kind of annoying to access in the grand scheme of things. But also because we need to tie the movement of this redstone block to the very beginning of the movement of the machine. Because if we remove this redstone block, after we've moved this TNT, they line up and it explodes. So we have to make sure this gets pushed on way early into the movement of the engine. So this is already ahead before, like maybe 4 steps later, this TNT actually gets moved forward. And thus we can keep our machine from detonating while it's moving around. Okay, so now let's talk about the last two bits, the ignition switch and the stopping switch. Now, both of these are essentially just really convoluted levers, and the reason why they're so weird is because we're on a flying machine and any lever will just get broken off. So this is one of the only ways we can maintain a stable switch that we can flick on and off on a flying machine, except only of these will ever be flicked on, because this is a single-use machine. What this one does here is it stops the engine, meaning we've selected where we want to drill, and this top one right here, we drive it forward, it puts the observer into the engine, fires it up, and shoots it downwards. So we can stop the machine wherever we want and fire it whenever we want. Alright, welcome back. Now that we know how it works, let's actually use it on our good old friend over there. So, let's start up the machine. Simply update that observer here, and it flies quite quickly actually. And let's speed up time a bit. Let this run a little bit faster. And where we're going to be striking our missile is right about right here. So, let's wait a bit, and now tick rate 20. And we're approaching our destination. So, we've successfully stopped our little missile right about where we want it. And now let's launch it. So, go to the next minecart. Simply ride this over. We actually break the detector rail as to not have this piston stay extended and get in the way of the machine. And now it's going to start the preliminary drilling process. Hopefully we can get through the entire region of caves. Oops. Looks like we missed. Anyways, after no time at all, this missile has magically moved over to this spot right here, a hole has been dug, and we're ready to start the flying machine again. If we just hit this button, we can now let it go. You know, out of all the things that I considered and failsafes I designed, I didn't really consider a skill issue to be a problem I needed to address, but here we are now. But it's okay, because we've fixed this problem. And... uh-oh. Fantastic news, my friends. One of the TNT actually hit Bob, and now we have his corpse in our hands. Unfortunately, that missile got caught on a little bit of that hole that I pretty irresponsibly dug. But it's okay, because we eliminated the target. We destroyed what would have been the base had nothing gone wrong. And that's basically mission accomplished enough for me. Okay, so that was a bit of a situation. But that's okay, whatever. Let's talk about what I learned from this project. Number one, pretty obvious. If you're ever going to design something that uses human operation, maybe practice a couple times with it beforehand. I mean, that was my first time ever striking a real target, and I totally and utterly missed. Next thing, if you're ever going to design something that it blows itself up immediately after every try, you're going to have a lot of prototypes lying around. And the reason I kept these here was, number one, it looks kind of cool, but number two, I think each of these prototypes represents a step that it took me to getting to the final design, which actually worked, and I think it's cool to reflect on every single mistake I made, and then subsequently patched. Now, lastly, we're going to talk about how I choose a project. And the reason why this was an excellent project for me was because one of the major things that I think about is, have I done it before? Is it something new? And am I going to be challenged? And am I going to learn something from it? And I never worked with Slimestone before, so this was definitely kind of an eye-opening experience, learning about the efficiencies, how to maximize my numbers, and how to get everything to work as fluidly as possible. So it was definitely a project I enjoyed making, and I'm glad I spent all that time working on it. Now we've reached the end of the video. I'm going to be posting a Lightmatica in the description, so if you want to build this thing for yourself, or maybe print it just to check it out, then go for it. It'll be down there. There will be some future projects that also involve explosions and killing other people as efficiently as possible, so stay tuned for that. Like and subscribe if you want to see more, and that'll be the end of today's video.